Anna, and I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Mid-Sussex District Plan 2021 to 2039. And the hearing sessions that are taking place today and have taken place over the last few weeks are part of that examination. A couple of housekeeping points first. I'm looking at the council. Can you make sure all phones are switched to silent? And can you let us know about fire escape arrangements, please?
Certainly, sir. I think everybody in the room has been here and heard this several times before, but for those who haven't, the fire alarm is a continuous two-tone siren. I don't think you'll be under any doubt that it is the fire alarm if you hear it. There is no drill that is planned for today, so if it goes off, it is the real thing. The nearest fire exit for most of you will be the door through which you came in, but there's also a door behind me. For those up on the gallery, back out the way that you came, back down the stairs, please. Do not use the lift. And the assembly point is in the car park just outside the oak door. So once you've gone through these doors, into the foyer, out through the oak door and into the car park and assemble there. And in terms of toilets, there are ladies' facilities on the ground floor, just off the main entrance foyer through that door. And the gents is on the landing behind the door that you can see up there, most easily accessible by the staircase from the main foyer.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. We'll do introductions now, although we have done them, of course, so we'll make this reasonably quick. Claire Jones-Hughes, Programme Officer for this week. So if you've got any queries about the programme, talk to Claire. Now we'll just go around the table quickly, Mr. Brown.
Paul Brown, King's Counsel for Mid-Sussex.
Morning, sir. Andrew Marsh, Head of Planning Policy and Housing Enabling at Mid-Sussex.
Morning, sir. Chloe Salisbury on behalf of Mid-Sussex District Council.
Morning, sir. Catherine Banks, Senior Planning Policy Officer at Mid-Sussex.
Good morning, sir. Eleanor Harmon from West Sussex County Council.
Good morning. Chris Brake, Planning Director at Thacombe Homes.
Isabella Buono, Barrister for Thacombe Homes.
Lynn Williams, Chairman of Hurstpier Point Society.
Sarah Sheath, Dorset Mahy Planning on behalf of Hurstpier Point and Sayers Parish Council, Sayers Common Parish Council even.
And Lindsay Thompson, Councillor on Hurst and Sayers Common Parish Council.
Thank you all. As you know, the examination is into the submission version of the Mid-Sussex District Local Plan 2021-2039, and it's examined under the September 2023 version of the framework, the National Planning Policy Framework. So the examination is looking into the legal compliance and soundness of the plan. Tests of soundness are set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. Hearings, as you know, are only part of the examination process because much of the work is being done in writing. I've read all the relevant documents. There's an ongoing written dialogue with the Council on a number of matters. And after this week's hearings, the Council will have a certain amount of work to do to address the housing requirement and identify new housing sites. In due course, there'll be a list of proposed main modifications, which are changes to the plan that are required to make it sound. And these will include changes to the housing requirement and additional site allocations. These will all be consulted on, and I'll consider the results of that consultation. If necessary, I'll hold further hearings at that point. In due course, I'll make a report to Mid-Sussex District Council, which will recommend main modifications required to make the plan sound. The Council will normally adopt them. If they don't, the plan won't be sound and can't be adopted. So let's now move on quickly to talk about this week's hearings. These are to do with the larger site allocations and those that have attracted a lot of representations. Today we're looking at the Sustainable Community Sites DPSC1 and DPSC2. I've already carried out unaccompanied site visits and have seen the allocated sites. I'm likely to carry out some further site visits after the hearing sessions. Before we move on to site DPSC1, there are one or two matters arising that I need to talk to the Council about. From my point of view, first of all, I mean, you've seen the list of things that I've asked you to do anyway. I don't need to go over those, but I've had a response following the submissions on methodology. I've had a response from you which I've just seen this morning. So this is a consequence of a discussion we had on the site selection methodology in the context of having to deal with the higher housing requirements than the submitted plan contains. And you produced a document setting out, as a result of that hearing, what you thought the methodology was, and you've had some responses. You've now come back on that. Now, I owe you because I've only seen it this morning, I owe you a kind of reasoned response to that, which I can't give you in detail now. All I would say is, as an overarching point, we have to be careful not to become too channeled by a rigid methodology. It's useful to have a methodology by which you can carry out an assessment, but ultimately, if there is a good site, don't necessarily let the methodology get in the way. You know what I mean. You know where I'm coming from, don't you? So some of the arguments that were put are, there's a sort of dancing on the head of a pin issue here, really. The point about, whether there's a cascade or equal weight, I think is one of those. You will know through your assessment of those sites which are the more appropriate, which can contribute best to sustainable development. All right. And I think the onus is up to you to demonstrate that. But I think we can take the sort of arguments about, well, is it a sequential approach, or is everything being treated equal? I think we can take that too far. That's, at this stage, you can't use that to determine what sites come forward. You actually have to do the work and assess what the sites are and then make that decision. But the methodology is there to guide you, not dictate to you. All right. That's the only thing I would say at this stage, and I hope that helps.
So do you yet have a view? I know you expressed a tentative view yesterday, but you sensibly parked that pending further thought. Do you have a view about whether we're going to need to come back on Friday to talk about that, or indeed to come back on Friday to talk about anything else?
I don't think we'll need to come back on Friday to talk about that.
Whether we need to come
I
back
definitely don't need to hold a hearing on it.
Right.
People have set out their
That's
views.
helpful,
Yeah.
sir. That's helpful.
Yes. No, people have set out their views very clearly. I owe you a response, and I want to do that in writing.
Yeah.
But just the point I've just made, that please don't let it. What the last thing we want is to get into a situation where your evaluation of a range of sites is being criticised because you didn't quite fit the methodology there or there. That is not how it should be. And the methodology is there to guide you, not to dictate to you. All right. But I'll put that in writing. Obviously, the onus is on you to identify which are the best sites. But no, I don't think we'll need Friday. If I've got any announcements, I think I will want to do a sort of a summing up. But that could be tomorrow, I think, after we've finished the two sites.
Right. So provisionally at the moment, you think on Friday unlikely to be needed at all?
Unlikely.
But
Well,
yeah,
I
okay.
can say not, if that helps.
Okay, well,
if
you're prepared to say not, sir, that helps hugely. So
Yes. Let's say not.
Right.
We
Okay.
won't
Good.
do Friday. All right.
Thank you.
So anyway, thank you very much for the response to that. Those submissions on methodology, and also I've received this morning a statement of common ground on Crabbett Park. Yeah. Is there anything else that we need to discuss at this point?
Not on our side, sir.
No, I don't think I have anything either. So shall we move on to talk about DPSC 1, which is land west of Burgess Hill. So thank you all for your contributions and the evidence submitted. You've all got copies of the agenda for this week. Good. Now, you've seen the agenda. It divides things into for general topics, but actually there are relatively few points that I really want to concentrate on here. Under 7E, I want to look at the ability of the scheme to deliver social community facilities, timing of delivery and potential impacts on other communities. And also whether there are actually any changes to the list of social community issues from the submitted plan. I'm not quite sure where things have moved on, so you can help me with that. That I don't think will take very long. Under 7F, I think that is something which is of wider interest, which is the delivery of the pedestrian and cycle network and its relationship, first of all, to the sustainable community at Sayers Common, and then the bus routing as well. I think that's something that I'm quite interested in picking up. And I want to understand the implications of the scheme for the wider highway network and the proposals, what the proposals are for improvements at Burgess Hill Station, and to what extent that they have been identified, clarified, who pays for where do the contributions come from, what is actually proposed, bearing in mind that there's a substantial site allocation there. And I've raised questions with that separately with the council. Then under 7G, I think I'd like to talk a bit about, the site does have existing features. There's an ancient drove road, some wetland and woodland, how that works in terms of the site allocation and the structuring of the development. That's under G. And 7H, questions have been raised by other participants about anticipated delivery and whether there's potential for market saturation there. So I think we should touch on that as well. Those are the points that I particularly want to focus on. Are there any other, I'm looking over here at Hurstby Point, and yeah, are there any others that you want to raise that I've missed?
I think, yeah, they're generally the main points. There's just the general overarching how it relates to Burgess Hill as a whole, but I think that will get wrapped up in under those headings anyway.
All right. Ms. Williams?
Can we assume that we discussed transport in Hurstby Point yesterday and don't need to discuss it again today?
We did talk about Hurstby Point yesterday in connection with Sayers Common, and there is further work to do on that, as you know, because I've raised that point about looking at wider impacts. So I don't think we need to go back there again today.
No, good, because, I mean, this will impact on it, but we discussed it so much yesterday then. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Yeah. So shall we start? What I'm going to do, I think, is sorry to do this to you again, but you're getting used to it. Yeah. Would you like the opportunity of saying a few words to introduce the application and the background to it?
Yeah, this is much more straightforward than the one yesterday. Burgess Hill is one of our, could arguably be our most sustainable settlement. It's a Category 1 settlement town. We've, in the previous plan, as you'll be aware, allocated development to the north at Brookley, Northern Arc as it was then, and to the eastern side at east of Kingsway. This is the next development on the edge of Burgess Hill that we're capable of bringing forward on the west side. Fairly closely located to probably the newest set of development aside from the two in the previous plan, that was built in the 1990s, early 2000s, close proximity to the scale of facilities that are being proposed at the Northern Arc, the town's leisure centre, one of the main leisure centres in the district, and the recently opened the Arc, which is a centre for outdoor sport, previously known as, which is just to the north of this site. It's just beyond the J. Murray Way, which is the the ring road, I suppose you would call it, around Burgess Hill. It's a key route for buses and transport. There's been a lot of investment by County Council and via 106 to creating a active travel route around the town, and so this site sits adjacent to all of those. As far as we were concerned, development of this size, as we've discussed before, as a sustainable community, will be able to provide the quantum of development that would lead to provision of on-site community facilities such as the primary school, community buildings, open space, etc. And in exactly the same way as the discussion we had yesterday, DPSC Gen is applicable to this site. DPSC Gen being the one that requires the master plan, infrastructure delivery plan, phasing strategy, alongside all of the other points in that policy which are commensurate with a site of this size.
Yes, and where are we on the master plan production? I can look at. Yeah, I reckon ask Fakenham Holmes that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's ongoing. At the moment, you've got our statement of common ground, which sort of sets out what our intentions are, etc. So in terms of a master plan, it is an evolving document at the moment, sir.
All right. Thank you. Were you wanting to say more, or was that it? Yeah, all right.
Did you want a breakdown as to what infrastructure was proposed within the site?
That was yes.
Come to that now, or there in your initial summary?
It was, and let's start with that then. So we've got current position in relation to. This is Crawley, isn't it? Wrong one. Wrong statement of common ground. Sorry, start again. Right. Yes. What I wanted is there any update to what's in the plan? I can read what's in the plan, obviously, but is there any update to that?
Salisbury's managed to fetch it quicker than I have. The updates, by comparison to what's in the plan, are set out in the Statement of Common Ground on page 8, and hopefully that's in tracks. So that is commercial / community up to 800 square metres was previously retail community 500 square metres. In terms of the education as a result of discussions with the county, just some refinements to what's provided there in terms of special support centre and land. That's a clarification. The neighbourhood centre, there's a clarification on the range of commercial and community uses there. And in terms of the previous provision for the outdoor the Mooga multi-use games area, that's been removed and replaced with other outdoor provision. That's as a result of discussions between us and Fakenham, given the, as I mentioned in opening, the level of provision in proximity to that site.
That's is that at Brookley?
And the Centre for Outdoor Sport, now known as the ARC, which was provided alongside Brookley.
Yeah. So those are the changes. All right. Thank you. Ms. Harman, is there anything you wanted to say on this?
I don't think there's any other updates really, just to clarify that the policy currently requires land for SEND school, but we would be seeking a special support centre alongside the primary school and also contributions to SEND off-site.
All right, now one of the questions I think that's been raised in some of the representations is this concern about the timing of delivery of social and community facilities, and whether this came up yesterday as well with Sayers Common. What happens in the interim? You start developing the site. When do the social and community facilities come in, and what happens in the interim period? I look at Mr. Brake, Ms. Bueno for that. Do you want to respond to that point?
Thank you, sir. I think the comments have arisen from the indicative trajectory that's been included within the documents, which I think the starting point maybe to emphasise is still indicative, and it shows how the scheme might come forward, but ultimately the triggers remain for discussion and to be nailed down through the DM stage. Clearly, there is a prioritisation on early delivery of infrastructure, in particular schools, and that's why it comes early on in that table. The concern about having the school open day one when the first house is complete is that normally you need a critical mass of students for the school to work, and that's something that sort of we've been thinking about on this side, but appreciate the concerns that have been expressed in the representations, and that'll be something that remains to be discussed when agreeing a Section 106 agreement.
All right.
And so, if I could just chip in, although obviously timing and triggers are important and do need to be discussed, this is a very different situation to the one you had yesterday, where you've got sites in multiple ownerships. You've got different people who are already bringing forward applications on their site, and there is a question about how you arrange that when most of the infrastructure is being provided on a site for which there isn't yet an application. Here, you've got a site that's effectively in single ownership. We would be anticipating a single application come in, which all of those things will be dealt with at that stage as part of the master planning process. So I'm not saying they don't need to be addressed, but they're a much more straightforward process for addressing them in this case.
That's very good, thank you. I don't really want to pursue anything more on that particular point. This is, yeah. Ms. Williams.
Yes, very sorry. It's very difficult for a school to plan ahead when they don't know how many pupils they've got. And I'm talking about Hurstpier Point Primary School. Are the pupils from this site going to come to the Hurstpier Point Primary School? And if so, how long for? How does a school do a long-term plan for what is basically a short-term situation?
Right, I don't know the answer to that. Are you able to help, Ms. Harman?
I mean, as you said, that it is very difficult with primary numbers because these babies haven't been born yet. So we are continually monitoring the number of pupils that will need school places. With this site, we initially did see it coming, with this school site, we did see it coming forward in an early phasing, but now we're looking at pushing that back purely because we are looking at existing developments that are happening in the area and the opening of those schools. So it is a case of just continually monitoring the situation, and we would only open the school at the time when enough pupils have been generated to justify opening it.
So, in other words, there is a possibility that children from this particular development, those who'd moved in the early stages of this development, would have to go elsewhere to school, which could include Hurstpier Point? Possibly
could include. I'd have to check with my education colleagues exactly where they're likely to go and where the capacity is. I can certainly do that and follow up after the session. But yes, they would have to go to other schools in the interim, but it is a case of just continually monitoring, and we do that on a regular basis.
Right. But how does that work when the lead-in time for the construction of a school is quite substantial, isn't it? Mm-hmm. You're what are you monitoring? You're monitoring the build-out rate of the development. Build-out rates, demographics, migration, lots of different factors. And obviously with new developments, there is a higher proportion of younger families that will generate more school pupils. So what actually, I'm trying to think what triggers you're going to tell me something. You've got your finger poised there.
Well, I don't know whether I'm going to or Mr. Marsh's, sir, but I mean, this is something that we would expect to be conditioned in probably at the outline stage in terms of, and I appreciate it would be a rough and ready calculation based on the number of units and possibly the mix, but you would have a look at what was being provided, the number of family homes, the likely child yield. Now, of course, in those circumstances, it's a prediction. It may or may not be accurate. It may be accurate in terms of numbers, but parents may choose to have their children educated in different ways than other places. But the best that we can do is to come up with a best estimate based on averages. But there would be a trigger built in so that ordinarily it would be effectively a condition which required the provision of a primary school before you could have occupation beyond a certain level, and that would then be a clear guide to the developer to say, you know what your build-out rate is. If you want to be able to carry on occupying these beyond this point, then you need to start putting your primary school in time to make sure it's possible to do that. And Mr. Marsh draws my attention to the fact that there are at the moment other primary schools in Burgess. I'm not saying nobody would go to Hurstpierpoint, but there are other, as I understand it, primary schools in Burgess Hill which currently have capacity. And our initial assumption would be that to the extent that children from the development need to be educated, they would be more likely to go there rather than Hurstpierpoint. But we can't rule out the fact that some of them might go to Hurstpierpoint. Mr. Brake might be able to help me on triggers.
Yeah, if I may, sorry. I was just going to mention our scheme that was allocated in the previous plan up at Peace Pottage and the delivery of the school there and the timing of that, because that school came forward very early on, and we're showing here the school opens in year 4, at which point you'll have 324, roughly, at the moment as it stands, dwellings on site. So in terms of having that mass, what we can do, I mean, there's loads of ways, and I'm not committing to anything here. I'm just talking about how we phase the delivery of the school. So our permission up the road had a phased implementation of the school. So at the moment there's 5 classrooms there. There's room to add on the early years and the reception class onto that school. So there's still capacity to do that. And that's, at that point, we're 619 dwellings, of which we have 1 to sell. So in terms of talking about critical mass, there are ways to deliver the school in phases, etc., on the site, and that's within our gift, and that will come through phasing plans and infrastructure delivery, and we can work with the council and the county council to that effect, and we're willing to do so.
And so you will have seen that the proposal here for DPSC1 is for a 2-form entry primary school. And there are different ways in which you can phase primary schools, either in terms of years or the number of forms. But if, for example, this started out as a 1-form entry school, but was then expanded as time went on, and as Mr. Brake says, that's a discussion that would need to be had with the county council as to the most sensible way of doing it. But there is scope there for a staged approach. It's not as if the school goes live in its fullest capacity on day 1 and that's it. It doesn't have, it could be that way if it needed to, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Thank you, that's helpful. Ms. Sheath.
Without wanting to sort of rehash the discussions we had yesterday again about the status of the master plans and the infrastructure delivery plans that are required through the DCSP Gen, obviously a lot of these things that we're talking about are quite reliant again on that master plan and making sure that things come through at the right time. And again, it was just, the concern is that, is the plan as it written at the moment, giving that master plan sufficient weight and sufficient hook to make sure that these matters are delivered with the developments that come out at the other end?
That's helpful too. Certainly from what I'm hearing, in terms of the progress that's been made, the fact that it's in single ownership, and the fact that the council obviously have control over the process insofar as they can insert things into the Section 106 when planning application comes forward, which contain those triggers. I think that gives me reasonable assurance that the facilities that are needed will come forward at the right time. That's what it looks like to me.
If I might just
Yep.
come back very quickly, I totally hear what you're saying, but I think the concern is without a policy requirement for certain things to happen at certain times, it's very easy to come back and amend an application, an outline scheme, a 106, and it's that tie-in with the policy. So driving it, the policy requires X. This is how we deliver it through the application, and pulling the plan through to an application with those hooks.
I think we heard yesterday it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, is it? Because, I mean, I shouldn't answer for the council. I'll put this to the council. It's a question, isn't it, of what level of detail you can actually put in the plan at this stage.
And I think here, sir, we would be anticipating a single outline application, which does make life a lot easier. I don't know whether that coincides with what Thacom are anticipating, but I'd be slightly surprised if it wasn't. So,
Yes, sir, that's the intention, and just to pick up specifically on timing, or to just emphasise, obviously the phasing isn't within our sole gift. It's for the council to approve what comes when and to negotiate those triggers. So if a developer were to come along and propose really late phasing of the education facilities, and that's not satisfactory to the council has adequate control over that through both the allocation policy and the gen policy that I understand you spoke about yesterday.
All right. I will move on from this one now. Let's look at 7F and movement. I'm going to come to you first, actually, on this, because I think there was an issue that you raised about the active travel route, basically.
Yes, thank you, sir. It might be just a case of in order to ensure that the policy is adequately justified, tightening up the wording of the middle part of, I think it's 7A, because as drafted, it suggests that it's for this scheme to contribute to the delivery of the Sayers Common leg of the shared route that begins from Sayers Common and goes through to Burgess Hill Town Centre and Station. And clearly for this scheme and its residents, the relevant part is the bit that goes through our site and then onto the town centre. So perhaps in that 7A, it should say, instead of supporting delivery of the shared route and then that reference to Appendix 3, it should be more specific and refer to that part of the shared route within the site and onto the town centre.
So at the moment, we've got a layout which prioritises active and sustainable travel connections throughout the site. It's slightly odd, isn't it? Because it talks about throughout the site, and then it gets on to links which might be outside the site. So there's sort of slight illogicality in the wording there anyway. But what you're looking for is greater precision around what is actually expected of this allocation.
Outside.
In terms of
yes, sir.
supporting.
As I understand it, sir, and Ms. Bueno and Mr. Bragg will correct me if I've got it wrong, they don't have an objection to the provision of cycleway, etc. facilities within their site, and indeed to connect their site to Burgess Hill Town Centre, they recognise that that's appropriate. What the council envisages is not only that those facilities would connect their site to Burgess Hill Town Centre, but would also be relevant to the provision of similar facilities from the other Sayers Common sites. There's a gap between the Sayers Common sites and their site. We don't anticipate that there will be much traffic, many cyclists coming from the Thacom site towards Sayers Common. There may be one or two, but we do recognise that the volume of that would not support a requirement for them to contribute to the link beyond their site going out towards Sayers Common. And I think what Ms. Bueno and Mr. Brake are saying is they're perfectly happy to do it within their site. They recognise that that will contribute to the link from Sayers Common, but they don't think that they should be required to help fund the link between their site and the Sayers Common sites. And so on that issue, we agree with them, and that's not what is intended. And if it's necessary to tweak the policy to reflect that, we wouldn't have a problem with that. I mean, what it does say is a layout, because Ms. Buono focuses on paragraph 7A of the policy, a layout which prioritises active and sustainable transport connections throughout the site, linking Burgess Hill to the town centre with potential to support delivery of a shared route with other allocated sites at Sayers Common and links to employment uses. That's talking about a layout within their site which would support the delivery of a shared route from the other sites to Sayers Common. And certainly what was intended when it was written was that it would provide the connection to the link with what's coming from Sayers Common, because that's part of the layout within the Thacombe site. But it's certainly not written, or it was not intended to be written as a requirement that they should provide a financial contribution to the services beyond their site.
I think the fact that we're having to explain this and understand it in this forum suggests that probably there's a wording tweak needed there just to clarify.
All right. Well, it might be helpful if, I can't promise to do what Ms. Brenner were asking for, but we can have a discussion with them about a form.
Well, I think have a discussion, yeah.
I think we're on the same page as to what we think it should be doing and saying. Yeah. So there's no issue there that can't be solved.
I think we agree on what the policy should say, and it'd be useful if we could discuss the wording.
Okay,
we can do that.
And that can go into a main mod. Yeah,
certainly, sir.
All right, Ms. Williams.
I'm slightly confused because everything mentions links to Burgess Hill, but the link to the A273, the Jane Murray Way, doesn't happen till year 3. And I would have thought that should be the first link that takes place to encourage people into Burgess Hill rather than going on the country roads to get to places like Hurstpay Point and other areas.
Do you want to respond to that?
I mean, that's something that can be explored, for sure. I mean, again, it comes down to the sort of actual, if we look at the number of dwellings, etc., the number of occupants and how that's managed through. But that is something that Thacombe would be open to exploring. But again, that's the delivery side probably comes down to more the application rather than the policy.
I think it's important, sir, to note, I understand why Ms. Williams raises it, but the 3-year figure isn't one that comes from anything in the policy framework that's here. I think it comes from your, at the moment, the phasing programme that you're proposing, which I don't think we've signed up to, yay or nay, at the moment.
That's correct, yeah. The sort of the aspirations for the application, etc., are set out in that statement of common ground, and the trajectory is there just to provide the council and everyone else with some clarity of subject of a good roll through planning, etc., what our intentions for the site would be.
Yes, I think that's right. So this is one of those things that it's not actually to do with wording in the plan. So it's not something I could recommend a change to.
It's a fair question to raise.
It is a fair question to raise. But I think, yes, this would be something that would be dealt with probably at application stage. Yeah. All right. Bus routing. That I just need to understand how that works as well. Who wants to talk about that? Can you give us an indication of current thinking on that?
So yeah, sorry, just on the bus link, the intention is to open up the bus link from the town centre to run through into our site and take it round as shown sort of through the plans that have been submitted as part of our hearing statements, etc. Again, it's an ongoing discussion with the bus providers. At a point in time, those discussions will be taking place. Again, Thacombe wanted to see sort of where we were with the local plan, etc., before opening up those discussions. So the commitment is there from us to make sure that they're delivered and opened up in accordance with what are the requirements.
All right, so that's something that presumably gets firmed up in the planning application 106. All right, Burgess Hill Station. can you, I look at the council over this. What have you had, I don't know who the landowners are around there. Have you got, is it the rail operators? Is it National Rail? Have you had discussions with the relevant stakeholders there?
We have, yes. So in terms of landowners in and around the station, the council is one of them. We own the car park, or the council-owned car park, and area of open space. That's to the west side of the station. So on the northern platform.
Is that the one at the lower level?
It is.
You've got a high level one, haven't you, near the station?
That's right.
It drops down. You've got some allotments at the far end.
At the far end, that's correct. Yeah. So we own everything on the west side of the railway line, in terms of the allotments, the car park, and the open space. Network Rail have the station itself and the station car park on that side and on the other side. So on the eastern side, on the southbound platform, and there are, I think, there's one other third-party landowner. Obviously, we'll be providing our response to you on the allocation that's set out there. One of the things that we'll be discussing in that response, in particular around car parking, is obviously we own the car park there. We are commissioning consultants to look at the capacity of that car park, both in its operation now and its capacity now, and what that would be in the future as a result of the development that's proposed at Burgess Hill Station and other developments such as this and others in Burgess Hill, to understand what capacity is required in that area. In terms of that, our discussions with Network Rail are wide-ranging, because obviously we've got the allocation there, which we're working with them jointly on, but they are looking or have looked at the IDP and inputted into that. And from their perspective, they are asking for financial contributions towards increasing accessibility to the stations, and items such as cycle storage and access at Burgess Hill Station. Important also to recognise Burgess Hill Town also has Wivelsfield Station. That's on the Brighton main line, but also on the Lewis Eastbourne line as well. There have been some long-standing plans to improve accessibility and access at that station as a result of developments that are already planned in Burgess Hill, so separate to this, and there was some funding identified for that, looking at step-free access. So Burgess Hill Town itself benefits from having the two stations on the line. There is a choice between the two. Burgess Hill Station itself is obviously the focus and has the greater amount of car parking, and at the moment the bus route that runs straight into the town centre. But Wivelsfield Station is also on that bus route as part of the link.
So you're looking at, or you're commissioning consultants, so the work hasn't yet been done to look at what capacity not only might you need, but also the site is capable of in the future.
We'll provide an update on that when we come back to you on the site itself. That's predominantly around the increase in yield. I think when we submitted the plan, we were looking at a smaller yield for that site for various reasons, mainly viability. Network Rail and ourselves are looking at the increased yield on that site and what that might mean in terms of land take, future provision. But we'll provide you an update on that.
Right, I'll stop you there. I'll look at our Thackham Homes representatives. So, Ms. Bono.
Thank you, sir. I suppose the point in our hearing statement was more of a question mark over what the justification was for that part of the policy. I suppose two things that have stood out, that firstly on cycle storage, I think in principle we acknowledge that there might be a need to improve cycle facilities as a result of residents from our scheme slightly more concerned by the reference to car parking facilities because given the location of this site compared to, for example, the Sayers Common site, there might be a greater expectation of active and sustainable modes into the station rather than driving. So again, it might be more of a tightening up of the wording as to what those improvements are anticipated to be and what we are and aren't being asked to contribute towards.
So, just going back over, acknowledge there might be justification for some support for things like cycle storage, that people would be cycling from the allocation. You're more concerned about the car parking element because
They're more concerned they're not asked, they shouldn't be asked to pay for parking.
you shouldn't be asked, yeah, all right. So, and I'll come back to you in a moment. And then what about, so when you talk about financial contributions to accessibility, is that access, is that level access and that sort of thing, step free, or are you talking about something else?
So the response we've had fairly recently in the last couple of months from Network Rail, as this is emerging, has been for them to request improvements to cycle storage and access, and I think access is in cycle access rather than pedestrian or accessibility. Yeah, separate access at Wivelsfield, that was as a result of existing developments. There's a separate scheme being looked at for that, not related to this, as far as I'm aware. And just to clarify again that in terms of access, it's active travel, pedestrian, cycling access at those stations. It's not asking for contributions towards additional car parking.
Do we know, or have we any idea at this stage, whether there's going to be additional car parking at Burgess Hill compared with now, or less?
I think that is something we'll be coming back to you on in the next couple of weeks. We don't have that information at the present.
Right.
And so we bear in mind the concern you've raised that certainly for example, the Sayers Common allocations, that it may well be an issue. We don't anticipate that being an issue for this particular site because the expectation, and indeed something we would strongly want to encourage, is that anybody from this site who wants to use the train does not get in their car in order to drive to the station, first of all. So, which is why Mr. Marsh makes the point that to the extent that we're asking for contributions to the station, it is related to, for example, cycle access, cycle storage, better pedestrian access to, not for providing car. It's not that there may not be a need for additional car parking, but that it's not attributable to this particular site.
Just make a note of that.
Or at least it shouldn't be attributable to this site.
All right. Yes, Ms. Bueno.
Thank you, sir. I think this might be another one then where we're agreed on what the intention is and should be, and it'd be useful for the policy wording to be tightened up to reflect that intention. So there's no question mark later down the road as on this point on car parking.
All right. Again, that's something you can discuss. Anything else on the movement issue? Anybody want to raise any other point? All right. Then we'll look at impacts, and there have been some representations made about the effect on the existing features of this within this proposed allocation. I think there's said to be an ancient drove road that goes through it, and some wetland and woodland. Do you want to talk about that in brief in relation to your master planning work?
Yeah, happy to. So obviously, again, a lot of this relates to the DM side and the application side that's coming forward. However, we have undertaken a number of surveys on the site and we'll continue to sort of update and assess those to form part of our thinking and our application, which is helping to steer the master plan. I think that any vision document that's been published has sort of showed the evolution of that master plan, which accommodates the sort of woodland areas and wetland areas. And as such, we're not envisaging touching many of those features, and actually we form part of the master plan to sort of come through as part of the application. I don't really know what at this stage what more we can say specifically on that point.
Does council want to speak to that point?
In general terms, sir, we made observations yesterday about the ability to accommodate development without certain effects, to the extent that there are particular features within the site. This is a relatively large site, and we are comfortable that there is scope within the master planning process to keep the bits that are important and place the development elsewhere. And certainly the evolving master planning work is indicating that that's where Thacom are coming from as well. So
thank you. Ms. Sheath.
I may be straying a little bit outside the topic, but I think it sort of encompasses it a little bit, and also goes back to my original point about the general character of this allocation and how it sits with Burgess Hill. Obviously, we've got sort of an L-shaped allocation at the edge of Burgess Hill, coming very close to Hurstbeer Point, jump in the Jane Murray Way, the green circle, which for years has sort of been the boundary to Burgess Hill. Obviously, it's due to land ownership issues that the allocation is what it is, but you've got sort of a big swathe of land that then sits between the allocation and what currently is the edge of Burgess Hill, with no real direction in the policy at the moment as to what really should be happening to that land. And the plan currently indicates that the built-up area boundary will be drawn to encompass the whole of the allocation and that land within. But what then happens to that land? Is that then up for grabs for development if it's not specifically deallocated or set aside for another purpose? And we have a concern that the plan doesn't really address that issue at the moment as to what happens to that land. Should it be developed? Can it be developed? And to what level of development, if that is the case?
Is it the case that the site allocation boundaries reflect land ownership patterns, or is there another reason why it takes the form that it does?
On the eastern side of the allocation, see on the plan on page 164, the gap, I suppose, between on the L shape that would fill in that L is in the council's ownership. It's the Burgess Hill Green Circle. It's a circle that, by its nature, encompasses, I think, at the moment, 3 sides of Burgess Hill, running from the Northern Arc, Brookley, all the way down to the southern edge. The eastern side of Burgess Hill is not in our district, but there is the link there, pedestrian and link on the eastern side of Burgess Hill. Because it's in our ownership, it's very important. It's got high biodiversity value, we would imagine. It's certainly not something that the council would be entertaining developing.
What I suppose the question is, what happens to it? So, did you want to add a point, a further point on this?
Yeah. I think we all know that Mid Sussex District Council disappears in just over 2 years. We don't know what's going to happen to land in the ownership of Mid Sussex. It will come under a new mayoral authority. Is there any way that we can protect this biodiverse countryside rather than leave it open to house building?
I want to put that to the council.
I'll try and find the reference for you of the protection that we do have in the plan. Maybe colleagues can assist, because it is currently protected as informal open space and important for biodiversity. If I can come back to you on that one, sir, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's outside the built-up area, so it has the basic countryside protection for land that's outside the built-up area.
But that would go under the new plan.
That would go, yes.
policy DPN BRE. Which is our green infrastructure policy. And yes, in the supporting text, page 70 BRE for the supporting text.
Yes.
We say land which will be required to create and deliver a multifunctional green circle around Burgess Hill will be safeguarded. It's shown on the policies map. It lists the various features there, and then that's picked up in the policy itself, in DPN BRE, not specifically mentioning them, although if it was felt that it was necessary to, we could include them in the policy, but the policy is an overarching policy for protection of such features, of which we've listed in page 70 BRE.
Did you say that was shown on the policies map itself?
It's shown on the policies map.
Okay, I was just wondering if we can relate that to the, I mean, if you look at page 164, which is the allocation, there's the area of, if I call it white land, in other words, the bit that's not the allocation. We can just relate that to what is protected. Where on the policies map do we see what is within the scope of DPN3?
It is the vast majority of everything that sits along that Pangdean Lane, east and west of Pangdean Lane. You'll see on the map on page 164, it's a slightly greyer area with the little green trees and grass, and that's the area that's in the informal open space DPN BRE allocation protection.
Is there a different kind? Am I looking at the right plan here? So I'm looking at the plan in the plan of the site on page 164.
Yes.
Yes. Did you say there was a slightly greyed out?
I hadn't picked up that there was a difference between the grey and the white on that. Is there I mean, presumably for the purposes of DPN3, there is something
it's shown on the.
Where can we go to see that? Because that might be easier.
Now you've mentioned it, I can just about see it, but
Once it's said, but even then, you're looking at it thinking, well, is this or isn't it? Which, yeah.
Yes, forgive my cynicism, but I lived in Burgess Hill when the Green Crescent was put in place to protect all of this land from building. So it would be good to have this strengthened.
is there any way that the plan should say more? I mean, it does refer to that particular site, doesn't it? What page was that again? 70?
74 is the policy, 72, 73 is the text starts on 72, so.
So if it's helpful, the draft policies map, I don't know if you've got that document.
Yes, I have.
Open. Just let me. It's I think the 5th page in the PDF is the excerpt for.
I've got it. I've got it. Yes. So what I'm looking at here, if I'm looking at the right one, is you've got to the west and south of the allocation, you've got green, but to the east, it looks just like white. Or am I looking at the wrong? I'm looking at the policy.
That's correct. So yeah.
And is that white? What does that white mean? Don't think the key helps you, does it? There's sort of black line, which is proposed built-up area boundary, and it comes within that.
Yeah, it's certainly something we can take away if it needs for us to. I mean, we've got the green circle defined in DPN BRE. If we need to amend the boundary of DPSC1 and include an area of protected land in the middle of that, then we can take that away. It's something for us to think about.
Well, I can't recommend changes to the policies map. I can only recommend changes to the plan. So, and also the council needs to consider seriously what it wants to say, if anything, about that piece of land.
Yeah, well, not least of all so because generally, and I think it's a point Mr Marsh has made at other stages in this plan, it's one of the reasons why there aren't significant allocations within the town area. By and large, the presumption is if it's within the built-up urban area boundary, then it's appropriate for development unless it's subject to some other constraint. And so that's one side of the equation. If it is simply white land, then although it's not allocated, this is prima facie, that the policy objections to it disappear. So the next question would be, does this have value, whether it's landscape value, buffer value, ecological value, which would then justify extending the protection of DPN3 or some other policy to extend it? But I think that's the question we've got to ask, or those are the questions we need to ask to come back.
Yes.
If nothing else,
I'm afraid
have we got a potential housing site here which could...
Well, this is why I said that, made that point. And it's, at the moment, there is a question mark over that.
Yes.
It's identified as being within the built-up boundary, on this plan anyway. So although there's this is very, very faint grey tinge to the other plan, that's not reflected on this one. And it is really, I think, a matter for the council to decide whether it wants to show that any differently, or whether it wants to show it as white land, which it is. But it's not even white land, is it? It's land within a built-up boundary, where there would be, I think, in future presumption in favour of development.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, I say white only in the sense that's the colour that it's shown on the map rather than in the wider policy.
A very good point that you raised. Thank you.
Point.
And Mr. Brake.
It's more for the council's benefit, sir. Obviously, this land is outside of our control, so we are sort of limited as to what we've shown on it. However, with our Reg 19 representations, we undertook a number of surveys, including a detailed landscape survey, ecology survey, which did look at that land and what's in there. So there's a lot of homework in there for the council if they want to go back and have a look at what's in there in terms of woodland improvements, etc. By all means, I can share it with you, but obviously it's our Reg 19 submission, it's all available.
That's very helpful, Mr Brake, thank you.
That is useful, yes. I'll just make a note of that. All right, so I can't give you any guidance on that, other than to say, I think for people here and for others, it would be useful to know whether the council had any particular intentions, whether, or indeed potentially by default, whether it is actually developable land by virtue of being within the built-up boundary. Yeah.
Thank
you. All right. Let's just move on to delivery then. And it's really this one point that there's a lot of development in this particular vicinity. The issue has been raised about if these are all coming on stream at the same time, is there likely to be market saturation? What is your considered opinion about the rate of delivery, the rate of completion on here?
So our rate of completion is based on sort of what we've seen locally on other developments. Obviously, I think we've referenced our delivery at Peace Pottage, albeit with a bit of a caveat that we were sort of coming out of the ground during COVID and with certain stamp duty holidays, etc. So obviously that was very preferable conditions. Current marketing conditions are less preferable. However, as part of our proposals, we're looking at a range of uses. In sort of, there's a C2 use on there, etc. Potential build to rent, etc. So, in terms of being able to flex to meet market needs and enable delivery to avoid saturation, then yeah, we're comfortable that the site can come forward as per the intention set out in our statement of common ground.
Thank you. Do you want to respond to that? Got any other points?
No, sir.
No, all right. I'm going to draw this discussion on DPSC 1 to a close. I'm going to pause then and see if there are any other points anybody wants to raise. No? You're happy you've said what you want to say and we've covered the points that I've set out. All right. Thank you all very much for your participation. We'll adjourn now. Going to resume at 11:45 to talk about DPSC 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. Excuse me. My name's Jonathan Bohr. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State. Start again. I'm Jonathan Bohr. I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the legal compliance and soundness of the Mid-Sussex District Plan, 2021 to 2039. So these hearing sessions are part of that examination. And there are a couple of people here, I think, who've not been here before, I don't know. So I'm afraid I'm going to ask you to do the housekeeping again.
I've got to earn my fee somehow, so. The fire alarm is a continuous two-tone signal. You will recognise it as the fire alarm if it happens. The fire exits, there's no fire drill today, so if it goes off, it will be the real thing. Either the door through which most of you will have come in, or the one behind me there, out through the foyer and the oak door. The assembly point is in the car park outside. There's nobody up in the gallery, so I don't need to trouble with that. In terms of public conveniences, there is ladies' loo on the ground floor, just off the main foyer, through that door around the corner to the right. And the gents is upstairs on the landing, again from the main foyer area, up the wooden staircase, top of the stairs on the left-hand side.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. So let's do introductions now. Programme Officer for today, Claire Jones-Hughes. And then we'll just go around the table, starting with you, Mr. Brown.
Paul Brown, King's Counsel for Mid-Sussex.
Andrew Marsh, Head of Planning Policy and Housing Enabling at Mid-Sussex.
Chloe Salisbury on behalf of Mid-Sussex District Council.
Sarah Little, Senior Planning Policy Officer at Mid-Sussex District Council.
Eleanor Harmon on behalf of West Sussex County Council.
I'm Elizabeth Brigden from Crawley Borough Council. With me I have Mr Ian Warren and also Mr David Forsdick, KC.
Well, sir, Dominic Smith, Highs Advisor on behalf of Waits Developments.
Morning, sir. Judith Ashton for Waits Developments.
Morning, Hannah Young on behalf of Peacock 5, one of the landowners of Crabbit Park.
Thank you all very much and welcome. So I'll just go through this introduction briefly, because most of you have been here before for one of the sessions. I'm looking at the legal compliance and soundness of the plan. That's the Mid-Sussex District Local Plan 2021 to 2039. It's being examined under the September 23 version of the framework. Most of the work is being undertaken in writing for this examination. The hearings are only part of the examination process. The written material is provided with a lot of information already, and the hearing will simply focus on matters that I want to know more about. The council, if you've been following this, the council has a certain amount of work to do to address the housing requirement and identify new housing sites. So in due course, there'll be a list of proposed main modifications, which are changes that are required to make the plan sound. And these will be consulted on, and I will consider the results of that consultation, consider whether it be necessary to hold further hearings at that point, and in due course I'll make a report to Mid-Sussex District Council. Now, earlier we had a hearing into DPSC 1, now we're moving on to DPSC 2 Crabbit Park. So I'd like to thank everybody for the evidence that you've submitted. Do you all have a copy of the agenda? Okay, and I've received the Statement of Common Ground as well, which I got this morning. So that sort of slightly changes how I want to deal with this today. I think if you've seen the agenda, you'll have seen that I've divided things into 4 different categories, but I actually want to deal with the items I and J and L as one issue. I want to look at impact separately, then I want to deal with the issue of affordable housing as well. So what I think we'll do is we'll actually go through the Statement of Common Ground and pick up points that arise that Crawley has picked up. the impacts, I think, I don't really have any or that many comments on. The issues of delivery might come out of any discussion we have on the statement of common ground anyway. Are you happy to go through the discussion in that way, using that as the basis? All right. I think that would help to focus us. Before we do that, I'd like to give the council's representative the opportunity of introducing this site and the background to it in brief.
Thank you, sir. Fair to say Crabbit Park has been on the council and the North and West Sussex Authority's radar for some time. The first identification of this site for the local plan process came from an Crawley study, which is in the library, document reference 012. That was a report that was commissioned jointly by Crawley Borough Council, Horsham District Council and ourselves, with the aim of seeking development in the Crawley area, recognising unmet need arising from Crawley. It identified a range of sites in Crawley itself, in Horsham, and one in Mid-Sussex, which is Crabbit Park. It's been under consideration for some time since then. It is now in a position in terms of its land ownership and delivery to be a site that we would support in bringing forward. It encompasses one of our DPSC policies, so it's a sustainable community that is designed to provide services and facilities on site, active travel links, etc., much like the site we discussed this morning and say is common yesterday. And it again would be subject to policy DPSC Gen, much like the site this morning and yesterday. We note in the North and West Sussex Statement of Common Ground, that's DC4, we discuss in there, that's a Statement of Common Ground between us, Crawley and Horsham, the housing supply position, the requirement position, the need position in other authority areas. And we set out there that this is one of the on or cross-boundary site options that the borough authorities have considered in the past and is now being brought forward for development. And we see this as being, despite being wholly within Mid-Sussex, as a site that could make a valuable contribution towards the unmet need for housing arising at Crawley.
Thank you. So shall we just go through the Statement of Common Ground? I've been through it, had the chance to go through it, and picked up some points. I think whilst Mid-Sussex and Crawley seem to be on all fours on a lot of points, there are some variances between you, and I'd like to just look at those. So what I'm going to do is actually simply go through this schedule in order, picking out points that I'd like to look at in a little bit more detail. So this is starting with the issue of transport then, and looking at the points that you have identified between you. Obviously, we know that Mid-Sussex has been asked to test options for higher housing growth. As you know, I'm involved in examining the Horsham district plan as well. And in effect, I've asked them to do the same thing. What I'm looking at here is the question of, I'm jumping it a bit here, I think, because there's more detail about highways later, but let's just hit this particular issue. This was part of the Crawley study to start with. It's obviously got a wide, the origins of the site have a wider remit than just Mid-Sussex. Same presumably goes for sites on the Horsham side as well. How far have you got, or what approach are you taking? I'm looking at Mid-Sussex to start with on this. to this idea that all of those sites, plus the ones in Crawley themselves, should be looked at in the round when it comes to impacts on the highway network, and in particular in Crawley. Not just the highway network, obviously sustainable transport as well. So it's a general question. What's Mid Sussex's approach to this?
So our approach to the transport modelling, obviously, West Sussex County Council are coordinating between all of the authorities in West Sussex, including Crawley and Horsham, and they are responsible for advising us and our transport consultants on the scope and the inputs for transport modelling. So what we've identified before submission was using, and I make no apologies, I'm no transport planner, but using Tempro growth to assess the impact of a development proposed in Crawley in quantum terms, but not in specific sites, because at that time the Crawley Borough Local Plan wasn't adopted. That's something that we've agreed we will now pick up, as you'll see from the Statement of Common Ground, that we can now look at the impacts of, for example, the Gatwick, the decision on the second the expanded runway, the DCO, and the knowns that are now in place from Crawley Borough Local Plan. So that's something we'll be picking up in more detail, but however at submission we felt that it was reflective of the levels of growth proposed at Crawley, and the outputs of that work are, as we'll see in the transport study, the impacts, whether junctions or links are severe or significantly affected, are not just constrained to the ones in Mid Sussex district. It includes areas that are outside, and that then forms part of the discussion, the IDP mitigation package for the plan. In terms of other areas, we recognise in the policy DPSC2 that we will need to be providing, or the developer will need to be providing links, active travel links towards Bury Bridges Station, for example, Crawley Town Centre and employment areas, in order to ensure that the impact of this development that would arise in Crawley, we were able to provide an approach whereby active travel is encouraged rather than journeys by private car. And in general terms, the plan has been through its Regulation 18/19 consultations, and as part of that we have collated all of the various asks of our statutory bodies and infrastructure providers on the impact of this site, and the mitigations that they've suggested form part of the IDP or are policy requirements in the plan to be resolved at application stage.
Thank you. So looking through here then, I'm looking at Crawley's response in the Statement of Common Ground. Crawley welcomes the confirmation that site promoters intend to work with Crawley Borough Council in addition to Mid Sussex for sustainable and active travel options. Crawley would be concerned that this should this be restricted to sustainable and active travel measures only, as the impact on local highways in Crawley is also an important consideration. So is that actually a difference between you, or is that a? Are you simply focusing on active travel or other things?
So we have noted in the policy that we have got that there is a requirement for active travel to the various locations within Crawley. In terms of impact on local highways, it's not a matter that the County Council has raised as one which is a severe impact as a result of this site, and any improvements to junctions or other measures will be picked up in the IDP.
Thank you. And again, picking up the Three Bridges station point, again, I'm looking at the bit in the Statement of Common Ground which says that CBC remains concerned that MSDP does not require contributions towards improvements towards access to Three Bridges Station. But you've just mentioned Three Bridges Station. So what's the difference between you on this?
I think looking at policy DPSC 2.7a is the layout, again, similar to the discussion we had this morning, prioritises active and sustainable travel connections throughout the site to improve sustainable transport routes to Three Bridges train station, Crawley Town Centre and areas of employment. I think from our perspective, the policy is requesting exactly as Crawley are asking for. And I think we note in here, Network Rail haven't asked for specific contributions as a result of the Crabbit Park site.
When you say contributions, to what? To improvements to Three Bridges Station?
That's correct.
I'll just go straight to Crawley then. Just on this particular point of the approach towards wider, in particular, transport impacts and improvements. Are there specific differences between you on these points?
Can I lead and then the rest of the team will jump in? Can I deal with highways first?
Yes.
We're very grateful for the extension of the TIA to the DCO and the Crawley plan as adopted. That just makes perfect sense. Whether there's impacts that need to be mitigated in the policy as a result of that will be for another day. We'll see what it turns out. No anticipation either way on that. That probably is everything that needs to be said on highways. In terms of sustainable transport and active travel links, I've got a wording issue. I don't think there's anything between us in principle. I've got a wording issue and then a couple of other points. If we can just look, please, at DPSC 2, paragraph 7. And one needs to read paragraph 7 with 7a as a whole. And we're concerned that the wording at the moment is a bit ambiguous as to whether or not it limits the interventions to on-site interventions, because the way it's worded. A layout which prioritises active and sustainable travel connections throughout the site doesn't then go on to deal with what that means in terms of improvements off-site. So the introductory words are simply throughout the site, and there would be scope for later argument as to what that meant and whether it encompassed off-site improvements. As to the off-site improvements there listed, we agree with all of those. The point that we raise under 7a, though, is that a key employment destination is to the north and northwest, to Manor Royal and London Gatwick, whereas Worth Way is to the south. And so we would have thought that it's necessary for the policy to identify the need for improved active travel and sustainable transport routes in that direction too. So when it says Worth Way, that's to the south.
Yeah, so it does say areas of employment. Including links to the Worth Way, yeah. Yes.
And the omission of Manor Royal and Gatwick, to our mind, doesn't make a lot of sense. If you're referring to Worth Way, you should be also referring to Manor Royal and London Gatwick, because they're key employment destinations.
Well, can I ask then, I mean, because this would be contributions, are there proposals in hand or planned to carry out transport improvements or sustainable transport improvements towards it's Manor Park, isn't it? Yeah.
Manor Royal.
Manor Royal. Yeah.
Yes, we're currently in the process of updating the borough's local walking and cycling improvement plan, and as part of that, there are improvements that are being undertaken in relation to linking the employment areas within Crawley. I think we haven't fully investigated the linkages between this site and those, and that is part of work that we are intending to be undertaking and hoping that the promoters and Mid-Sussex are involved in that process with us. In terms of the linkages towards Three Bridges station, those are also things that, because of the nature of this site coming forward in a different planning administrative area, having those things marrying up is something that is slower to come about, and that's where our concerns are, that we need to make sure that this policy reflects the impacts beyond the site boundary and where that travel will be coming into.
Is there anything in your local plan that flags up improvements to active travel, sustainable travel in that direction, Manor Royal?
Yeah, there's nothing specific in the plan from that perspective, but the general principles of the plan do lead towards that. Yes. So for each the nature of developments within Crawley are smaller and more dispersed. Predominant amount of developments coming forward is within the town centre. So the need for that sort of requirement in the actual local plan wasn't as
all right. So what we've done is we've talked about the potential impacts of development outside. We've heard the council's approaches towards active and sustainable travel means. There's nothing in the county council's representations that suggest that highway interventions for vehicular traffic are required. What you're saying is that you're looking for something a bit more specific in the plan that would actually identify not just Three Bridges, but Manor Royal in terms of access. Right. So let me now go to Mr. Smith from the site promoters and just hear from you on this.
Thank you, sir. Yes, it was just on that point actually with Manor Royal. We have progressed the pre-app quite far with West Sussex, and we're engaging with them on a sustainable transport package. And one of the routes that we have identified is to the north of the site, so it's a strategic corridor between Crawley and Copthorne. The development to the north of the site, St Modwin, have provided connections or are required to provide connections through their site, which provides linkages to the north of Crawley. So that's something we're looking to tie into and provide a connection to. If I recall correctly, I think we've got a meeting with Mr. Warren on the 1st of April to discuss further the sort of the LC WIP programmes and what sort of works we need to do to connect and to provide those linkages to the necessary directions. We would like to keep Worth Way as a connection too. It is important. It's a good leisure route to the south, and as part of the other Waits developments across the district, we've sought to deliver improvements there to Worth Way. So Crawley Down, for example, has contributions towards enhancement. So for us, that's an important link too. So it's essentially 3 corridors, one to the centre, one to the north, and one to the south of the site. Thank you.
Question then, is there anything that the plan doesn't say that needs to say at the moment?
I think if I can answer that by starting with where Mr. Forsdick started, which is criteria or requirement 7A of the policy, layout which comprises active and sustainable transport connections through the site. A, to improve sustainable transport routes through to Three Bridges Station. There's a distinct irony here, sir, because this morning you will recall there's almost identical wording in DPSC 1. Thacum were concerned that was ambiguous because it suggested a requirement to make contributions outside their site. Mr. Forsdick is concerned because it actually doesn't allow contributions outside the site. I have to say, as a matter of wording, I think Mr. Forsdick is right and Thacum are wrong about that. In that the wording does relate to, as I said in response to Thacum this morning, a layout which prioritises, and that's talking about a layout through the site. And insofar as you've got the bit about improving sustainable transport routes to Three Bridges Station, that's still tied into the initial words, a layout throughout the site. And I can see where Mr. Forsdick's point is that doesn't actually involve or require any contribution to the link from the edge of the site to the station. The question then is, are there any identified requirements which are necessary or might, even if they're not detailed, might be foreseen as necessary? Because, of course, to include it as a requirement, we'd have to demonstrate that it was justified, that there was a proposal there which was likely to come forward. And here, I mean, I appreciate the county have been talking about junction improvements, but as you've heard, we're not aware of anything from them. We're not aware of anything from the station itself, although their requirements might be more understandably local to the station, such as cycle parking and the sorts of things we heard about this morning. But again, we're not aware. I think if somebody can provide us with a proposal or an indication for a proposal, we probably wouldn't be averse to tweaking the wording of 7A to make it clear that it didn't stop at the boundary of the site, but we do have to demonstrate that it is justified.
I completely agree with that. The problem, of course, is that there may be impacts, but they're not quantified yet, and there may be capital projects for the future, but they're not pinned down yet either. That's really the problem with that. And I think any discussion on wording needs to involve the developer as well, for the simple reason that it impacts on them. I mean, the thing about local plans is if you can be clear as to what's required at the outset, it helps, obviously, all those involved, all the stakeholders, developers and so on, they can see what they're in for. So there is a risk in having something that is just vaguely out there, and which is not pinned down.
So at the moment, I mean, I suspect we're probably not going to be able to bottom this out today, but I'm minded to suggest, can we take this away for a discussion with Crawley and with Waits, so that we could be clear about whether there is there clearly isn't a defined plan at the moment, but whether realistically there is something that may come up, and if so, the extent to which it would be reasonable to request Waits to contribute to that, and the extent of any contribution and the impacts, so that we can make sure that it doesn't sort of have a viability effect on the development as a whole.
I mean, it sounds as though Waits are quite involved already in discussions on the
Indeed, it does.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't sense that if it was clear that there was a scheme coming forward and their scheme was going to contribute to the need for that, I don't sense an in-principle objection to helping with that. But of course, until it's been quantified, nobody knows. But I do see the force of Mr. Forsdick's point. Mr. Marsh, you wanted to...
Yeah, just in addition to that, the discussions that we've had over the last couple of weeks on the monitor and manage and the role of the TIMG, of which Crawley are, as we noted in the terms of reference, are a party to, haven't joined us yet because we haven't got onto individual sites. We've been discussing terms of reference and the makeup of the group, but one of the roles of the TIMG and the monitor and manage approach is that if there aren't currently schemes identified to support with active travel, sustainable travel, and they are required at some point in time, the TIMG can direct and discuss prioritisation of the pot of money that's been collected. So that is a measure. Exactly, we can amend wording here, but that provides another level of comfort, if that helps.
So in summary, sir, I think in principle, Mr. Forsdick's right about the limit of 7A. The question whether it should be expanded, and if so, how, is something we can take away and have a three-way discussion about and come back to you on. Obviously, if there is a justification for it, it would be sensible for there to be a policy hook in the plan.
That's very helpful for me. So I leave it to you. Timescale,
we might have some time this afternoon to start the conversation, so which would be...
I'll leave that with you. All right. Sorry, Ms. Ashton.
Sorry, if I can just help. I mean, is it not just a case of, in terms of 7A, referencing rather than areas of employment, actually saying Crawley Town Centre and areas of employment including Manor Royal and Gatwick and links to the Worthway?
I think that's part of it, but it doesn't overcome the fact that 7 itself is talking about a layout within the site. It is not talking about works which go beyond the site boundary.
It's exactly the same point we've had it with other sites. Yeah, yeah. So it is.
I think we
just,
can agree something between the three of us.
Yes, and possibly quite quickly.
Yeah.
So if I could just jump in there for a second. Mr. Brown mentioned the policy hook, and that's all we're asking for, is a policy hook to allow it if it's required on an individual scheme coming forward.
Thank you, Mr. Forsdick. And I think also that's the general impression I get from most of the statement of common ground, except the affordable housing issue, which we can talk about in a bit. Ms. Brigden.
I just wanted to just mention that if it's needed, then perhaps we can involve the West Sussex County Council highways as well, if it's needed. But I think, as Andrew, as Mr. Marsh mentioned, we would certainly be positively expecting the TMIG to be bringing that forward through the course of the implementation stage.
All right, all right. It may not be necessary to have the county council at this stage. It's a minor wording change. All right. Then there's a wider point about infrastructure requirements in here.
So if you're moving off transport, could I raise one other issue?
Yes, of course.
If you're going, it's about buses.
Yes.
And at the moment, I think it's paragraph 6 of the DPS C2, and also I think it's in DPS C general as well. But you see the reference to effectively the physical infrastructure with the co-location of lockers and shared transport facilities and so on.
Yeah.
But I'm very happy to be told I'm wrong, but I can't find anything about actual provision of bus services or fastway or rapid transit or so on within that. And I know the intention was that there's going to be, but I'm not sure the policy wording actually secures that.
Yes, it talks about, you're right, it talks about the physical infrastructure. Is there a hook in there relating to bus services? I mean, I suppose 7A again, because 7A isn't confined to active travel connections. It talks about sustainable travel connections, doesn't it?
My concern, sir, was if in a public inquiry into a particular application, there wouldn't be any hook for us, for anybody to say, hang on, the public transport infrastructure isn't good enough.
Yes, it's... Ms Ashton, is that a legacy flag, or do you want to comment on this?
No, if I could comment on it. It was just really a question, it might be semantics, but the transport mobility hub located close to within the neighbourhood centre with public transport connections. I mean, is it covered within the public transport connections or not?
It's intended that it is, but if we're arguing about it now, it suggests that it might benefit from a little clarification.
Yeah, well, it's sort of, yes, it's economical language, but perhaps it needs to be brought out a bit. Any other points on that one?
Could I just ask a question, if I may, about the TIA and what the process would be thereafter? Presumably the TIA will come out with its results, and if there's any need for any policy changes on the back of it or main modifications on the back of it, that'll be the subject of consultation outside the inquiry process and outside the examination process, with you deciding whether you need to have a further session later on that.
It depends what comes up. You know, I'm trying to deal with as many things in writing as possible.
Of course. Yeah.
It depends whether there's any significant changes.
I think if the TIA identifies, for example, a particular junction which requires an intervention which is down to a particular site, then logically we would be looking to build a hook into the policy to reflect that. If we miss one or fail to do it, then as and when that the main mods come forward, that can be picked up at that stage, I would anticipate so.
All right. Did you want to respond to that, or are you content?
Fairly content, sir, just to provide some reassurance that obviously the development will have the full transport assessment as well that will come part and parcel of the planning application, and being EIA requirements, we'll have an IEMA assessment which will consider the wider transport impacts and not just the junctions. As I know you were reversed to yesterday, it will consider links and severance and those sorts of bits and pieces too.
Good. All right. No, that's very helpful. All right. So there may be some issues coming out of the TIA that will be picked up. They'll go in main mods. You'll be fully engaged in that anyway. Yeah. All right. Now, is there an issue around other social community infrastructure, retail, and so on this site? Is there any tension with Crawley at all on that? I was trying to understand where you were coming from on in the statement of common ground on this.
No, subject to the secondary school issue, which we're satisfied with West Sussex County Council's position on that the school will serve the needs of the area, and there'll be enough spaces for the planning area somehow. Yeah.
Any issues? No. Then I will move on to the affordable housing point then. So what the council is saying is sites within mid-Sussex, and therefore affordable housing will be sought in accordance with the district plan policy. 30% currently required on this site, as with all other sites in mid-Sussex. Crawley is saying because this site is so close to Crawley, and recognising Crawley's unmet needs and its high level of affordable housing need, that this site should provide at least 40% affordable housing. I think that's a very brief resume of what you're saying. And that's in line with what the inspector said for Crawley. Now, there's viability work. We've got the site promoters here as well. I'm interested in pursuing this. You've approached the issue of affordable housing consistently across all sites. I mean, my starting point is here. We are dealing with a mid-Sussex District Council housing requirement, which includes unmet need, or it will include unmet need from adjoining authorities. And the question really is, does that approach justify a differential in the quantum of affordable housing, proportion of affordable housing on certain sites? Because, is it right that this site should be considered in isolation on this? We've had a discussion of affordable housing already, and I didn't see anything wrong with the approach the council had taken across the board on 30%.
No, sir, but you may recall, I think it was in response, was it Wild? CPRE, who
Yes.
made a particular point about this, and we did say we were going to go away and do some more work, and their point was made with particular reference to Crabbett. It wasn't necessarily exclusive to it, but certainly Crabbett Park was the site that they lit on, and on their figures, you know, we should be providing more affordable housing. So that is work which is underway at the moment, and we have to wait and see what that comes out with. I mean, obviously there is an issue as between, you know, not setting up unfair differentials between developers in different parts of the area, and that's something that the Waits may wish to speak to. But I think from the council's perspective, if that viability analysis demonstrates that Crabbett Park in particular could sustain a higher level of affordable housing, there would be no in principle objection from the council to making that clear in the policy, and if necessarily amending the general policy requirement to reflect the fact that Crabbett Park was an exception to that. But it would depend on those numbers coming out in circumstances where the viability assessment work we've done at the moment, and of course it's subject to review, but that suggests that we are already beginning to push the envelope at Crabbett Park. So, I mean, well, we have to wait to see how the numbers crunch out. But you'll remember, sir, the approach that council has taken broadly is to look at the extent to which infrastructure costs would add to the cost of a dwelling, and once you get to the sort of 30,000 figure, that's the point at which you're at risk of tipping the viability exercise over. And with Crabbett Park, we were getting close to that on the work that's been done so far. It needs to be updated. But we'd look to you for general guidance on that. So obviously there is a need for affordable housing, which is particularly strong in Crawley. And we recognise that if Crabbett Park could sustain a higher level of affordable housing, then that wouldn't cause the site to fall over and fail to come forward. But we are also conscious of the fact that you've got different housing developers, and there needs to be a very clear basis for imposing a higher limit on one than there is on others. The answer to that might be the rationale is the viability assessment. That is what justifies it. But I'd like to hear what Waits have to. Well, we would need to hear what Waits have to say before we did that in any event, I think.
Yes, and I will go to them. I'll just make one or two observations. The issue was brought up originally by CPRE, who started with the thesis that the plan wasn't providing enough affordable housing because there was a very considerable rural affordable housing need. That was the basis on which they started. I don't really know how that then got translated onto Crabbett Park, to be honest. But anyway, it did.
If it helps, I think it was because in their viability work, Crabbett Park was the least still viable, but of the three large sites, I think that was why they picked on it, because as a worst case scenario.
Yes. So the finger got pointed at Crabbett Park that way because it was said to be the least viable, and they did that testing. That's the first observation. The second one is that, and it is something you just alluded to, which is there is an issue of consistency because, yes, DPSC 2 is near to Crawley. There are sites, other sites, Sayers Common, for example, which are in the southern part of the district, close to Burgess Hill and close to the massive amount of unmet need along the south coast. And I'm actually quite concerned about introducing differentials unless they're very clearly substantiated and justified, because there could be perceived unfairness involved here. All right. I'm not sure it has to be based on viability either, otherwise you'll end up with different levels all over the place. So those are my initial observations on this. But I do recognise that there is a specific issue, and it has been identified in Crawley. And on other local planning examinations I've dealt with, for example, around Oxford, I've accepted up to 50% on some sites as a big differential with the remainder of those districts because of the extreme levels of unmet need around affordable housing in those locations. But I think here there is that wider problem. We've got a lot of unmet need on the south coast. We've got unmet need in Crawley. How do we deal with that? So I'm going to stop there, and I'll turn to the developers. Do you want to offer comments on this one?
If I may, sir. Thank you. First and foremost, I think it's kind of important that we also do recognise the affordable needs of Crawley. We're perfectly well aware of the issues that were raised at the Crawley local plan examination and in the inspector's report, and they're clearly set out. But there is also the issue of the scale of the infrastructure ask being made of Crabbit Park and the position within the viability appraisals that have been done to date. And whilst I accept that they are being reviewed in the light of the comments that were made by CPRE, and as Mr. Marsh correctly identified, CPRE's thesis did actually start on the premise that they thought Crabbit Park was the least viable of the 3 strategic sites, which is why they picked on Crabbit Park. But you know, when you look at what is in IV2 and IV4, there are a couple of things I just want to highlight because I think it's important in the context of the further viability work that's going to be undertaken. And this in part goes also to what Wild have been saying, because at the moment you've got 2 extremes, sir, being put to you at the examination. You've got CPRE saying there's tons of headroom everywhere and we should all be providing a lot more affordable. And you've got Wild saying the exact opposite, saying, you know, build costs have gone up, values have gone down, and actually nothing's deliverable, viable, unless you go for a significant quantum mass of development in certain areas. So with that as a background, existing use values, we've kind of had a debate about that and we'll carry on discussing that with the local authority. But in terms of baseline building costs, the costs that are in IV2 and then subsequently in IV5 have increased quite significantly. You've also got other costs such as biodiversity net gain contributions. Clearly, the cost of those is associated with baseline biodiversity assessment of the sites, but at the moment you've got in IV2 £2.17 a square metre. At the moment, biodiversity costs are coming out of probably around £50–55 per square metre. So there is a significant cost change there. And in addition, if you go to Appendix 11 of the viability study and what it says about Crabbit Park, it has net to gross figures of 60%. We're at 45% at the moment, given the on-site constraints. The actual site area it provides for is 122 acres. That is significantly less now when you take on board again all the constraints there are on site. Again, there are also issues with what it includes within the costings for infrastructure and the fact that it actually was based on 12,000 a unit for 106 contributions. As you've heard, we're now well in excess of 30,000 a unit. It's more like 35 actually at the moment from what's being worked out. And that is purely on 106 contributions. That isn't other on-site infrastructure costs. So when you take all of that on board, yes, we are happy to work with the local authority on the additional viability assessment work they're doing. And yes, if there is a proven need, we are prepared to look to provide for additional affordable. But as things currently stand, we are concerned that that additional ask will have implications. And there are additional infrastructure asks now being made of this site. So, you know, it's escalating. There's only so much you can get out of a pint pot. And it's getting very squeezed. That said, you know, we are happy to talk. We will do what we can to assist. But I think at the end of the day, it is all down to the additional work that the council are now doing, what comes out of that and how that is looked at. But as you rightfully say, sir, there is also an additional issue of unfairness and how this interrelates with the other sites. And what other developers would say of that, because if it happens at Crabbit Park, where else does it go?
You start from the basis that, as you say, CPRE lit on you because you were supposedly the least viable. So if the numbers support an increase for Crabbit Park, I know that if the answer came out we should be putting 40% in across the plan, so that concern would disappear. But
yes.
That's a very different outcome.
Right, so the council are going to look at this, they're working on it. It's an issue that came up in a previous session. And we will look at where that takes us. But, bear in mind the observations I made that, there's differentials themselves could well cause problems. Yes. So you have to be very careful about that. Yeah. All right. That, I think, is there anything, Mr. Forsdick, do you want to
mind if I just put, as we're here, just to set out our stall, first of all, we're grateful that there's going to be an additional FVA work. We're going to take a keen interest in it, and obviously that's the starting point. If that comes out with lack of viability, then that's the end of the story. But in terms of the unfairness, we come back to the big picture point that this is in very real terms, this is an urban extension of Crawley. Meeting or designed to meet Crawley, and to an extent Crawley's needs and its affordable housing need as well. And as you've seen in the figures, Crawley is only able to meet, I think, 15% of its affordable housing needs. So it's a sort of Oxford-type situation, which is an extreme situation with a site right on the edge of Crawley, which, if it's got the wherewithal to deliver more affordable housing, it should be asked to do so. And this is a point that I'm going to come back to when I'm going to ask you to think about mix on this site as well, about a carve-out for this site as being this site is conceptually different from other sites in mid-Sussex for the reasons you know, based on Act Crawley. So in terms of the unfairness, we don't see any problem with it being carved out from the generality of the rest of mid-Sussex, if it's viable to do so.
Thank you. Ms. Ashton.
Just a point on the unfairness element. I mean, if the viability work were to demonstrate that it was viable to provide for 40% or whatever figure at Crabbit Park, it might be 35%, we don't know yet, we've got no idea. Then I think the council, in terms of the work they are currently doing, sir, to assist you in looking at what additional sites could be identified to deliver further housing to meet Crawley's unmet needs, that would also need to be considered in the same context, because you can't be treating Crabbit Park in one way and not the others. If they are also meeting Crawley's unmet needs, then they also would need to be looked at in that context, which then begs the question, where are they relative to Crawley's boundaries?
And so on that, I mean, you will know, although we recognise because of its proximity to Crawley, Crabbit Park has a particular role there, but we're not ring fencing the Crabbit Park allocation and saying this is the bit for Crawley's needs. Crabbit Park will also meet Mid-Sussex's needs, and you've made the point more widely that people from Crawley won't just be living at Crabbit Park, they'll be living on other sites and other allocations elsewhere. So to that extent, that I understand the force of what Ms. Waits is saying.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
All right. One more, yes.
Yeah, that's correct to an extent, but the affordable housing nomination rights only apply at Crawley sites. So Crawley's nomination rights to affordable housing don't arise across the rest of Mid-Sussex District Council. They only apply, as I'm told, to the Crawley locations. And so that's why it's specifically tied to the Crawley need. It's
yes, that's something that sits outside of this plan, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes,
Yeah, the nomination rights, I think it's 50-50 in terms of nomination rights, was agreed outside of the plan for the Peace Pottage site. There's nothing in the plan that says there's a policy on where we look at nomination rights. That's for us to agree between us on individual sites.
So where does that leave us in terms of other sites that might be identified that have an element of Crawley's unmet need in them?
Going back to what Mr. Brown said a minute ago, how would we define that? I mean, I think at the moment we're defining, well, not even defining, but Crabbit Park is adjacent to Crawley, so there is a logic in taking that approach for nomination rights, as was the case at Peace Pottage. It's physically on or adjacent to the boundary. How we would manage that for sites in the rest of the district is much more difficult.
I think, the point I made, and you probably are aware of this, I think, because I think Ms Brigden was at a previous session, is that obviously the unmet needs from adjoining authorities need to be recognised. They have an impact on Mid Sussex's ability to meet its own needs, even without the idea of ring-fencing those sites, because you will have population growth, household formation. People will already be moving into places in Mid Sussex that has a squeeze on the Mid Sussex market. We have to look at things in a kind of holistic way. And it's actually quite difficult to ring fence sites on that basis. That said, council's going to do the work. We're going to look at the viability, and we'll look at whether there's it has to be very good justification for this one. Yeah. All right.
So just on that, could I just ask the council to just refer back to the Statements of Common Ground with Crawley in 2024, September 24, which is DC6, which specifically identifies the need for this site to be contributing towards the affordable housing need of Crawley.
Yeah, I think that goes without saying because of the location of the site, obviously. Yeah. But that doesn't mean to say that it's a ring-fence site.
Oh, no, absolutely. Totally get that. Yeah.
Right. So that I think I'm going to draw a line under affordable housing at that point. I'm looking at you, Ms Young, because you've not said anything yet, and I just wonder whether you wanted to say something.
No, to confirm, I'm very much here on a sort of monitoring role, just to keep an eye.
Monitoring and manage.
Monitoring and manage. I know maybe that's been answered. I'm here sorry, thank you. Here to observe and listen into the conversation.
All right.
You may not hear anything from me. Just for the landowner, that's all.
Well, we just did, so it's a good start. Yeah. All right. Yeah, so we dealt with affordable housing, we dealt with nomination rights. I don't think, yes, there was. I asked previously, but we got stuck on affordable housing. Looking at this, the Statement of Common Ground under the heading Other, there is there any tension between Council's approach in terms of on-site facilities, retail and so on, and Crawley's approach? I'm looking at Crawley here.
What we have stated is we have set out in our Crawley Borough Local Plan a requirement for an impact assessment for any development that is 500 square metres gross floor space or greater. So that's what we would be requesting be done for Crabbit Park's neighbourhood centre. I think it would be the expectation that it would look at the impact of the site on Crawley Town Centre, which we can see probably would be quite limited, but also the neighbourhood parades that we've listed that are closest on the eastern side of Crawley, so Maidenbough, Pound Hill, Peterhouse and Shires.
Right, so let's look at that, because in principle I would say that that's not the right approach. I'd just be quite blunt, because if you're creating a new development of a particular size that requires, for sustainability reasons or whatever, a neighbourhood centre of a certain size, you would not then do that retail impact assessment at the application stage to see if it was going to affect Crawley Town Centre, would you? So it is part of the positive planning that you actually create a neighbourhood centre that is the right size for that development. That said, there's nothing in here about retail impact assessment, but I just wondered what the council's approach was on that.
We would agree with you on that, sir. That the purpose of the inclusion of a neighbourhood centre at this site, as it is for all of the DPSC sites, is to serve that development of its day-to-day needs. So, the small-scale convenience retail, day-to-day, bread, milk, those sort of elements, rather than designed to have any sort of impact on another neighbourhood centre which is serving that neighbourhood in another district. So we don't see that there's a need to do that.
Is there a need to put anything in the plan, I'm just asking you really, to make sure that the neighbourhood centre is of the appropriate size to serve this development and doesn't become something of a magnet, a bigger magnet.
We have policy requirement 4, which sets out the types of facilities that would be required at the neighbourhood centre if it would assist to include some wording which suggests that it is to meet the day-to-day needs of Crabbit Park rather than a wider catchment. I wouldn't see a problem in that.
That would go into point 4. Do you have any comments on that?
Just, if I may, sir, I mean, first and foremost, you're right. Normally, the threshold for a retail impact assessment is 2,500 square metres in the MPPF and planning practice guidance. I'm slightly confused by Crawley's position, to be quite honest, because if you look at their local plan, and I appreciate it's not a core document in front of you, sir, but I think it was appended to their Matter 1 statement. But policy TC5 of the local plan, which is on page 158, has a 500 square metre threshold for retail impact assessments, but not for retail provision within neighbourhood parades. And I, sir, would submit that, in effect, this is no different to a retail parade in as much as what it is seeking to achieve. Therefore, why do we need to do a retail impact assessment?
Yeah. What about what about Mr. Marsh's suggestion that you could put in some sort of qualifying statement into point 4, which says a neighbourhood centre designed to meet the day-to-day needs of Crabbit Park?
I think that's, in a way, it could assist, but in another way, taking Mr. Forsdyke's position earlier on, if you're in a Section 78 inquiry, how is that defined?
So can I mean, there may not be an easy way through this, but I'm just looking at DPS2 as it sits within the wider suite of policies, and we've got the particular requirements, and the focus was on 4. But if one goes back to the earlier bit of the allocations, where there's the table with the number of dwellings, the amount of employment land, and then there's a heading for retail community. Now on Crabbit Park, that's TBC. It's interesting that if you then look at the wider suite, so for example, Burgess Hill, which is 1350 dwellings, has retail stroke community 500 square metres. And then if one winds the clock forward the other way and looks at DPSC3, I'll just find DPSC3, which is 2,000 dwellings. And there you've got a retail community, a bracket of 2,000 to 4,000 square metres. Now, once you get over 2,500, it may be that you're into the realms where there might be a concern, albeit that this is retail stroke community, so it embraces both those things. I mean, a way possibly might be to put a figure in the retail community box, which is clearly, which presumably, provided it was less than 2,500 square metres, would presumably not trigger concerns from the point of view of Crawley. I don't know whether that's a way forward or not, but it would be a way of achieving numerically what otherwise we'd be trying to do in terms of just general explanatory text.
How come this ended up as TBC?
Well, that was, I should probably have known the answer to that before I raised it, sir, but it was the thought that went through my mind.
Anybody shed any light on that one?
I think at the point of submission, we were still working through the master planning and what was actually capable on this site, both in terms of achieving the yield and the various ranges of facilities and that we're asking for. So I think that might be why Miss Ashton might have a better memory than I do.
So are you now in a position to put something in there, in that table? Miss Ashton?
Perhaps if I could try and assist. I think the issue, sir, really is one of, we need to test the market to see actually what the market deems acceptable and appropriate here. probably a range would be better than a specific figure, because a specific figure could cause issues, but possibly a range would be the more sensible. Clearly, the range at Sayers Common is quite large, so...
If it was an up to figure,
Yeah.
would that, because the up to, provided what it went up to was at a level which didn't trigger Crawley's concerns, that would satisfy them. And it would also meet your point about not being committed to provide something which there wasn't a market for at the end of the day. Can I suggest that we take that away as
Yes.
I mean, if Crawley are happy that might be a way of sorting the problem out,
Yeah,
and if Waits are satisfied that it's not going to commit them to something that they can't do, because as I understand it,
I was just going to say that, I think we'd be very comfortable with taking that forward. Certainly, as Miss Ashton pointed out, that the Crawley Borough approach is very much to have neighbourhood centres. So we do want to encourage that and support that. We do have wording in our plan that requires any additions to those parades to be appropriate for the neighbourhood in terms of scale and function, and we do refer to day-to-day needs of residents. So we'd be very, very happy to get it.
But as I understand it, what you would both be looking for is a maximum figure. So to that extent, you're singing from the same hymn sheet, not necessarily a commitment to provide all of that. So
just bear in mind that the table is, these are not sort of rigid figures. So, you know, for example, net residential dwellings, 2,000.
Yes.
You're not going to be rigidly 2,000.
No.
Same with employment, 1,000 square metres E-class. These are ballpark.
Yes, and for some of those, there is already a bracket given for a number of them, sir. So,
So it's not, this is not something that you would be specifically pinned down to, but if it went substantially beyond that, then you're outside of the terms of the plan, basically. So I think we can work on that basis. I'm happy with that. Ms Ashton, you
Sorry, if I could just come back, sir. I've just taken instruction and I've been advised that up to 2,000 would be acceptable from our position.
Perhaps Crawley can take that away and think about it, and if they're happy with that, then that's a very easy thing to propose.
All right. That's very
I'm
helpful.
glad it wasn't a complete red herring then.
Right, let me take, here we go. So, I think I've got through all the points from the Statement of Common Ground that I wanted to go through. Is there anything, did we not touch on housing mix? Yes.
Could I address 2 points? One is mix and one's capacity, site capacity.
Oh, no, I was going to do a site capacity within the context of the item K. Okay. K and L, which I think grouped together. But yes, I know you've got a point on that. Before that, should we do housing mix?
Yeah. The short point is that there's a disparity between the housing mix required for mid-Sussex needs under their SHMAR 2024 and between the housing mix that would be required to meet Crawley's needs under its SHMAR 2019. And historically, Mid-Sussex has said, well, our mix is within so our range of mixes is within your needs, and therefore there's no contradiction. But our point is that the figures have moved out; they've become inconsistent now. And I've asked for a little table to be put together to save me having to go through lots and lots of figures with you. But would that assist if I provided that to you?
Happy for you to submit it. Yeah.
I've given it to everyone else, but if there's spare copies here. This is just what I asked to put together to try to explain the points as shortly as possible. And the items in red are where figures in Mid Sussex are out of range of the figure for Crawley. And you'll notice some quite high-level points that we say are quite important to this in terms of the need that's being met. If we look at the market housing, first of all, you'll see that in the larger units, the range under the main modification, I think, that's been put forward by Mid Sussex is 30 to 35%, but the need for Crawley is at 25%. And so that will have a knock-on effect in terms of the smaller units in the market category. And then in terms of affordable, we've tried to organise this table in the same way as the policy. Let me just make sure I give you the right reference. DPH7, page 147 of the plan, and MS8, where the adjusted figures are. So we've used the same framework. So then affordable ownership, you'll see that they're out of range again in the too many, if you see 10 to 15% for one bedroom for Mid Sussex, but we would be, our need for affordable ownership would be much higher. And then for two bedroom, our need would be much lower. And so there's a disparity that's fed through. And what we're suggesting, and that goes for affordable rented too. And all we're suggesting is that DPH7 in its second paragraph allows for site-specific variations of the mix depending on need. And we're wondering whether it would be sensible to incorporate in DPSC2 a hybrid need or a blended need that reflected the site-specific needs of the Crawley catchment.
Yes, this needs to be looked at in the context of the discussion I had with the council on housing mix anyway, and there's including main modifications on this particular point, because my point to the council was they had a table in there, but I regard that very much as a starting point. So it's not a rigid table, it's a starting point. And it very much depends on what could be achieved on what size the sites are. Now, I appreciate this is a larger site, and therefore it might be easier to align the mix with the table that the council have produced. Nonetheless, I still regard the mix as a starting point. The mix can change over time depending on what the current assessed need is. So we have to be careful not to get too high. And the other point about it, of course, is that there's a marginal difference between you on market housing, which is the largest element. Affordable ownership, this is not a large element. Affordable rented is a reasonably large element. There are some differences there. The question is how you might deal with this pragmatically in a policy. I'm looking at the council. Do you have any views on whether you might need to tweak the words to reflect the more specific needs of the site?
I just wonder, before we do that, and it's not a criticism, Mr. Forsdick was trying to find me and I was being elusive to provide me with a copy of this, but I know Ms. Waits has had longer. Ms. Ashton, I've done it twice. That's all. Yes, I do. Yes, Ms. Ashton has had longer to look at this than I have, and I don't know whether there's a comment to make in terms of the numbers themselves, because I think it would help us to hear that before we reply, if that's possible. I'm sorry, Ms. Ashton.
I'm beginning to think you might know something I don't, but don't tell my husband.
Yes, let's hear from Ashton Developments.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh dear, thank you. Couple of things, if I may. The first is, when one looks at the market housing, the difference really is at the upper end. And whilst I note and see what Crawley Borough Council are saying, at the end of the day, this site is in Mid Sussex. It also has Mid Sussex's needs to meet. And you're right, sir, actively trying to pin down a mix at this stage when you are dealing with such a large site that will be delivered on a phased basis And basically saying, in 2036, you're still going to be delivering to this range and mix, I think is slightly dangerous because things do change. In terms of the affordable, you'll be aware, sir, when you look at the Mid-Sussex SHMAR, which is H6, the table in that differentiates the affordable provision between affordable home ownership and affordable rent. But the Crawley Borough Council local plan, and it's on page 190 of their local plan, which, as I say, is appended to their Matter 1 statement. Their affordable housing requirement badges their affordable housing intermediate and rental tenure in one. It doesn't differentiate between the two. So you're not really, or I don't know, but you don't appear to be comparing apples with apples. You're comparing apples with eggs in this table, because at the end of the day, this doesn't, in my opinion, look to actually aggregate the affordable requirement that Mid-Sussex has relative to that being proposed by Crawley Borough Council. The affordable ownership provision within Mid-Sussex is 25% of the affordable, and the affordable rent is 75% in terms of the tenure split within the policy. I can't establish, looking at this, whether this has been worked out on that basis. That said, the main area of difference is between the 2 and 3 bedroom affordable units. That's basically, you have Mid-Sussex identifying a higher need for 2 bedroom units in the affordable arena, predominantly because the affordable ratios in Mid-Sussex are such that there is a higher need for 2 bedroom units within the district. It reflects the affordability of the district. And whilst I accept what Crawley Borough are saying in terms of the scale of their affordable needs and the fact that they are looking to Mid-Sussex to try and assist, and that they are looking, subject to viability, to this site potentially providing for more, you have to do that in the context of Mid-Sussex's requirements as well. And at the end of the day, the affordable provision being requested by Mid-Sussex is seeking to address its requirement. If it is providing more 2 bedroom affordable units, given the scale of the affordable deficit within Crawley, is that really going to affect things in as much as is it really going to prejudice those in affordable need in Crawley? Because there are so many of them, we are being told, they're still going to want these units, subject to the scale of the nomination rights you agree between the 2 parties in any event. So it's still going to meet a need. And surely, as it's within Mid-Sussex, it is really, the starting point should be Mid-Sussex's provision and Mid-Sussex's need. The other thing to actually highlight, sir, is that when an application comes in, we are well aware of the fact that Mid-Sussex District Council's housing officer will look at the affordable need relative to that parish and the demands within that area. So whilst you have the range, and Mid-Sussex, in fairness, do provide for a range for a specific reason, it allows flexibility so that the affordable housing officer can say, within Worth Parish, the need is X. It might be totally different down in Burgess Hill or Sayers Common or somewhere else, which is why there is flexibility built in. So I think one needs to be very cognizant of the fact that if you begin to change this, you are potentially opening up issues. And in any event, given the scale of the unmet need, surely any mix will be actually meeting the needs, given the scale at which they've been identified.
All right. Ms Brigden.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just make 2 points. The first one's a point of clarification about the table. So I think Ms Ashton pointed out that the Crawley Borough Council, the Crawley Borough local plan combines the affordable element, 4 E's, in a table. The figures that I have put in the table in front of you are from, so that's actually the bottom line. So that's so if you can see the CBLP affordable housing element, intermediate and rental tenure combined, those are the figures and that are in the Crawley Borough local plan. The ones in the columns next to affordable ownership and affordable rented are from the SHMA, so the Strategic Housing Market Assessment 2019, which does differentiate in the same way that the Mid-Sussex plan's done. So I have set that out so that it is like for like in the table. So that's clear, and that is why there's the bands. So the bands along the bottom are that range. They also include a slightly different mix that we've got for the town centre as well. So that needs to be taken with a little bit of care, whereas the SHMA figures are actually the same. So that was the point I wanted to make on that. I just want to make one other point about the Miss Ashton's comment regarding the affordable housing need and it being met. Just one point to make about the types of developments that are coming forward within Crawley are obviously of smaller units because they're more urban, and this site does offer the opportunity for affordable family housing, so affordable rented family housing, and as we discussed, there's discussions ongoing with regards to nomination rights, so they would be accessible for Crawley residents that are on our Crawley waiting list, and we do have a high proportion of families within the borough who need affordable housing rather than just the small units. Thank you.
What you're saying is that it's all to do with what you can achieve within your urban area. The sites are presumably more constrained, therefore they tend to be smaller units. Therefore, a site near to Crawley, which has got more space, ought to be providing larger units. That's what you're saying. All right. Ms. Young.
I'm going to say something. I was just going to argue, I'm not going to get into the detail of the various figures, but obviously we're looking at delivery of a site over quite a long, extensive period, and I would just refer to the policy on housing mix, which DPH7, I would argue that's got sufficient flexibility for discussions on housing mix with the current mix at the time in terms of Mid-Sussex and Crawley, and I don't think we need to overcomplicate it and make it more difficult in that respect. It does say underneath the table, variations to the above will be considered where the council is satisfied that the site characteristics and location dictate that there is a more appropriate mix of size of dwellings. So I think the flexibility is there within the policy.
Thank you.
Could I pick up on that point?
Yes, Mr. Forsdick.
Just, if one goes to the DC6, which is the Statement of Common Ground in 2024 between the two councils, it talks at paragraph 26, it talks about the need to ensure housing mix in terms of dwelling types based on the strategic housing market assessment for both authorities appropriate for an apt Crawley location. So that's the common ground as to what the mix here ought to reflect both authorities' needs. And obviously paragraph 27 of the NPPF says the policies should reflect the common ground, and that's all we're asking for.
Right. Now, I will go back to the council on this. I'm looking at the times, 1:10. There was the issue of densities and design, which I do want to explore. It depends on how long we're going to take. I'm happy to go on till 1:30 and then finish this hearing session. If it's going to take any longer than that, we'll take a break now.
I suspect density might be quite short, sir.
All right.
Not least of all because, and I understand from quick conversation I had with Mr. Forsdick, there may have been some misunderstanding or uncertainty about this, but you know, as part of the work that we're doing in order to try and identify additional capacity, we're not just looking at sites that have been rejected before, we're also going back and looking at sites that are in the plan. Yes. as to whether or not the density of those could be increased. And I think Mr. Forsdick and Crawley were under the impression that we'd somehow ring-fenced Crawley and Crabbett Park and said, but not for Crabbett Park. I mean, we will carry out that exercise at Crabbett Park. Whether or not that leads to a change, I can't say at the moment. Crabbett Park has been under consideration for quite a long time, and I know Ms. Ashton could speak at considerable length as to why at the moment, certainly they take the view that the figure that's there is right. But that is something we are in the process of reviewing in the light of your comments. And so that will happen in any event. And that might go some way to meeting the concerns that Crawley have got, that we're underestimating what Crabbett Park might be able to deliver.
And that was our only point. So we were simply asking for Crabbett Park to be included in that review assessment as to the deliverability of
which it will do, and it'll involve yourselves as well.
Yeah, I mean, if I could actually come back on the density point, if I may, because I think there is some confusion. I don't know if it would be helpful to you, sir, if I do it now, or
well, we'll carry on as long as we don't go past past.
Okie dokie. Within the statement of common ground between Mid Sussex and Crawley Borough Council on page 11, Crawley say they support the District Council's key principle of making efficient use of land. However, Crawley Borough Council understands from the most recent meetings with Waits that some areas will have densities in the 20s, with the whole site having an average of 42. If you look at my Matter 7 statement, sir, you'll see from that I include within it a indication of the densities that we are now looking at on Crabbett Park on page 10. We are looking at a range with parcels going from 20 to 29, and there are literally 2 of them. They're very constrained parcels. To 30 to 39, and thereafter parcels of 50 to 59 within the centre. So we have quite a significant range, which is not that far dissimilar from the density that is being suggested by Crawley Borough Council. It is a range. They've said they expect higher densities of up to 60 dwellings per hectare to provide for sustainable transport, etc. We are comfortable that the range that is being provided reflects the constraints of this site. There are a number of constraints on this site, including constraints associated with listed buildings, with ancient woodland, etc. And so, if I just may, just in terms of the issues raised by Crawley Borough Council themselves, and I'm going to go to S4, which is a statement of common ground between Mid Sussex and Waits. Within that, we've kind of gone through the policy, the provisions within the Crawley local plan, within section 5, cross-boundary issues. And we've cross-referenced paras 1217 to 1223 of the Crawley Borough local plan and the key considerations within that. Within that, sir, you will actually note that there are a number of issues that are raised within Crawley's own plan about ensuring that the development is designed in a specific way, that the urban design has regard to existing landscape setting in 4, that it respects landscape character, setting and heritage in 9, that it is respectful of biodiversity, etc., ancient woodland in 10, 12, 13. It goes on, it itself lists a number of constraints. It identifies development here needs to have regard to. That is what we have sought to do, and that is why we have the range of densities we do. We've clearly looked to maximise the density of development we can within the constraints we have got. I mean, being blunt about it, it's not within my client's interest not to build more if they can. They can't, given the constraints that there are there.
Thank you, Ms Ashton. Any response to that? Do you want to come back on that?
Obviously, we'll put our 2 pennies worth into the discussion with the council on appropriate densities, and it'd be a matter for the council to come back on that in its main months.
Thank you, Mr Forstick. Now, from my point of view, this is something that has to be informed by the master planning process. And the master planning process will take into account the key points that Ms Ashton has raised already, which are to do with we are talking about a development which projects into the countryside. It's got sensitive landscape around it. It's got its own landscape features and historic features. And therefore it does need to take into account those things. It also, on the other side of the coin, yes, you want to be able to ensure that your neighbourhood centre is viable by having population density around it, and that your public transport facilities and active transport arrangements are also supported by population density. And these are key things that I'm sure you will have regard to when it comes to the master planning of the site. And I think your exercise on density can't be carried out in a vacuum. I think, that it's very important that you take those things into account.
Absolutely, so it's why I made the point, and I think Ms Ashton's very helpfully taken you through in detail some of the things. The point that I was making, that Crabbot Park in many ways is some way ahead of a number of the other allocations in terms of the amount of information that has informed the site allocations policy. So just picking up on Mr Forsdick's last observation, I'm sure he and his clients know the information or the request for further information on sites went out at the beginning of last week. If people do have updates on particular sites which they think should inform the overall view about either the acceptability of those sites or their density, we're expecting that information by the end of Friday this week.
All right. Now, I have covered all the topics I wanted to look at. Is there anything, I'm looking around the table, anything that you feel I've overlooked or that you want to raise at this point? No. All right. Then I'd like to thank you all very much. It was a very useful and helpful contribution, and thanks for the statement of common ground which came in just at the right time, so thank you. I think from, I'm just looking at council, have you got enough from me to indicate what you need to do?
We were in the middle of density of housing mix, and then we went off. Have we got a conclusion on housing mix yet? We're satisfied with that.
Well, I'm not sure that I had my say.
Well, that was. Now I come to mention it.
All right. Yeah, that's fair enough. I hear what more Mr. Forsdick and Ms. Brigden have to say on this. But as with some other things, we had a discussion earlier about the risk of being too precise about things. We had a conversation earlier about methodology, and methodology is a guide. It's not a sort of a dictate. And I think the same applies for housing mix as well. And we've got to, I think it is right to recognise that needs change over time as well. So when it comes to looking at this site, I do think that there is, Crawley's needs are a material consideration. When it comes down to the planning application stage, I think that is something that would need to be taken into account as a material consideration. I don't think that it's wise to tweak the table of sizes at this stage, because things can move on. And as I said earlier, much earlier in the proceeding, in fact, it was in my written conversation with the council, this is really only a starting point. It's a starting point. What you come to for any particular site has to depend on the circumstances at the time. That means Mid-Sussex's own needs. It could also mean Crawley's needs as a material consideration. So I'd expect those to be taken into account at the stage of the planning application. Is that clear on that particular point?
So yes, and I think Ms Young very fairly makes the point that there are, to the extent that you need hooks in DPH 7 to do exactly what you've done, there are plenty of hooks there for that exercise.
Yeah, all right.
I just raised one point on that I accept there's some hooks as to flexibility, but they're not tied to needs of other authorities. And there's no link, there's no policy hook to require the exercise that you just described. And that's really what we were aiming at.
Well, what hook would you like to see?
Well, maybe in
sort of between 3 and 6 words, should we say?
Between perhaps in DBH 7.2, including the needs of the housing mix needs of adjoining authorities. DBH 7.2, page 147. Have I given you the right reference? I hope I have.
Right, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. Sorry, DBH
H7.
Page 148.
148, sorry.
Thank you.
Location, open brackets, including the needs of adjoining.
We changed this though slightly in the modifications, didn't we?
Oh, okay.
We have the, it now says, so after the table, it now says housing development should reflect this mix as far as possible, subject to size, characteristics and location and identified need and viability. So arguably, sir, I think the points that Ms Young was making is that the hooks are there.
It's in there,
Yeah.
yes.
This is in the main mods document MS8, is it?
Correct, sir.
Okay. Yeah, well, the same point goes, though. I mean, that wouldn't naturally encompass needs across the boundary. That's the point.
It does say identified needs.
It does,
Yeah.
sir. So that would, no.
I'm happy with that.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. All right. Again, I'll say, is there anything else that, thank you for your intervention on that. Anything else that anybody wants to raise? All right. Then, again, thank you all very much for your contributions. It's been very helpful and very useful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, sir.